It started with a simple invitation to dance. But when she pulled me closer, I realized some nights are unforgettable. I wasn't expecting to notice her that afternoon. The day had been ordinary, the kind of Thursday that drifts by in muted shades of gray, where the sun tries to break through but never quite does. I was carrying groceries back to my apartment when I saw her on the balcony across the way. She was stretching, arms reaching toward the sky, long black hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. The sunlight caught the strands, giving them a faint bronze glow. Her skin was lightly tanned, her dark brown eyes framed by subtle laugh lines, her posture confident yet relaxed. She looked effortlessly graceful, the kind of presence that draws your attention without asking for it. She wore a soft cream blouse tucked into fitted jeans, simple and elegant, as if comfort and style were one and the same. When our eyes met, it wasn't dramatic, just a flicker of acknowledgement. Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile, quiet but warm. I felt my chest tighten, that familiar flutter that happens when someone's presence feels unexpectedly significant. "Hi," I said, almost automatically, unsure why I had called out. "Hi," she replied softly, her voice carrying a melody I hadn't expected. It was calm, measured, but there was a subtle warmth beneath it, as though she was offering a space for someone to exist without pretense. I pretended to be focused on balancing my bags, but I couldn't take my eyes off her. There was something in the way she moved, the gentle arch of her back as she leaned against the railing, the tilt of her head, the casual grace in the way she crossed one leg over the other, that made the world around me feel slower, quieter. Even the hum of the city below seemed to fade, leaving just the soft noise of distant traffic and birds in the afternoon light. She gestured toward the small balcony space beside her. "It's a nice day for a break," she said. There was no invitation, really, just an observation. But somehow it felt directed at me. I nodded, swallowing the sudden lump of hesitation in my throat. "It is," I said, my voice a little too loud, my heart too fast. She smiled again, not with expectation, but with a calm certainty that somehow reassured me. In that brief exchange, something shifted. A thread of connection formed in silence, subtle but unbreakable. I didn't know her name or what she did, or why her presence made the day feel lighter. But I knew I wanted to find out. I walked away, my steps slower than usual, carrying the image of her on the balcony with me. Her eyes, her smile, the quiet elegance of her presence. I didn't know it then, but this small, ordinary encounter would mark the beginning of a night, and a memory I would never forget. It was a few days after that chance encounter on the balcony, and I hadn't been able to stop thinking about her. The memory of her small, knowing smile and the quiet warmth in her voice lingered in my mind like sunlight on a gray afternoon. Then, unexpectedly, she appeared at my door. "Hey," she said, standing there with a casual ease that somehow made my pulse race. She was dressed in a soft, powder blue blouse tucked into tailored trousers, her long black hair falling freely over her shoulders, catching the bright late afternoon light. She looked effortlessly composed, yet there was a subtle vulnerability in the slight crease of her brow. Her dark brown eyes met mine, and for a moment, the city outside felt miles away. "I haven't danced in years," she said softly, almost as an afterthought, a playful hint in her tone. "Want to help me fix that?" I blinked, momentarily taken off guard. Her words were simple, but the invitation carried a quiet intimacy. She didn't ask me into a crowded room or a social gathering. She was inviting me into a small, private world, and the weight of that trust made my chest tighten. Her apartment was just down the hall, sunlit and warm, filled with subtle details that spoke to her personality. There were potted plants by the windows, a few framed photographs leaning against the shelves, and vinyl records stacked neatly beside an old record player. The space was bright, comfortable, and alive, exactly like she felt to me. Calm, confident, yet quietly inviting. As we stepped inside, she gestured to the record player. "I've got some music," she said, sliding a record onto the turntable. A slow jazz tune began to fill the room, soft and warm, the crackle of the vinyl giving it a touch of intimacy. She extended her hand toward me, a small smile playing on her lips, and I felt the subtle thrill of her touch when our fingers brushed as I took it. We moved into the living room, the sunlight streaming through tall windows casting a golden glow across her polished wooden floors. The music guided us gently, her hand firm yet graceful in mine. I noticed how natural it felt, the way she led with a quiet confidence, how the light caught the curve of her shoulders and the long waves of her hair. "This isn't about steps," she said, her voice low and steady. "It's about feeling it again." And in that moment, I realized the invitation wasn't just about dancing. It was about trust, about letting someone see a side of you that had been hidden for years. Every glance, every brush of her fingers against mine, carried more than movement. It carried warmth, curiosity, and the soft spark of something unspoken. By the time the song ended, I was aware of more than her rhythm. I was aware of her presence, the way it settled into the room and into me, leaving a quiet, lasting impression that I wouldn't soon forget. Arm, filling the sunlit apartment with gentle vibrations. I stood across from her, a little unsure, trying to convince myself I wasn't nervous. She smiled at me. That same quiet, confident smile that seemed to hold both mischief and reassurance. Her long black hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, catching the afternoon sunlight, her dark brown eyes shining with something tender yet playful. "I'll guide you," she said, her voice low and steady. "Just follow my lead." I nodded, though my hands shook slightly as she extended hers. When I placed my palm in hers, it was lighter than I expected, but firm enough to guide. I felt the warmth of her skin, the subtle pressure of her fingers as she adjusted her grip. The touch was electric in a quiet way, not overwhelming, but insistent, like a gentle reminder that she trusted me to be present. She led me to the center of the living room, sunlight spilling across the polished wooden floor. The city outside was distant, muffled by the glass of the windows. Here, in her space, time slowed. Every sound, every flicker of light, felt heightened. I noticed the slight sway of her hips as she moved, the graceful arch of her back, the curve of her shoulder catching the sunlight. She was wearing a flowing beige blouse tucked loosely into high-waisted trousers, comfortable, yet elegant, and the movement of the fabric accentuated her natural grace. We began with a simple rhythm, just swaying side to side. Her hand rested lightly on my shoulder, her other hand still holding mine. The warmth of her touch radiated through me, soft but insistent. Her gaze met mine often, her dark brown eyes patient, inviting, full of a quiet curiosity that seemed to ask, "Are you really here? Are you really seeing me?" I laughed nervously when I stumbled slightly, and she chuckled, the sound like a soft bell echoing through the room. She leaned closer to correct my posture, and for a brief moment, I felt the subtle steadiness of her heartbeat against my chest as her chest brushed lightly against mine. That tiny contact, casual yet intimate, sent a shiver down my spine. She whispered something about losing the rhythm, and I realized I wasn't worried about the steps at all. I was paying attention to her, the way her hair moved as she turned, the faint freckles on her lightly tanned skin, the curve of her lips when she smiled, the way she made the ordinary act of moving feel like an entirely new language. We moved together in silence for a few more minutes. Every glance, every brush of her fingers against mine, was a conversation without words. The sunlight brightened the room, casting long shadows that danced with us, a mirror to the quiet connection unfolding between us. When the song ended, she looked up at me with a soft smile, a faint flush on her cheeks. "It's been a long time," she said, voice gentle but full of warmth. I nodded, knowing I'd remember this moment long after the music faded. The first time our worlds brushed so closely, in rhythm, in trust, and in quiet intimacy. After our dance, we settled onto the edge of her bed, the room still bathed in warm late afternoon sunlight. The music had faded to a soft hum from the record player, leaving only the distant city sounds and the quiet pulse of the apartment. She sat beside me, her long black hair falling over one shoulder, lightly tanned skin catching the golden light, dark brown eyes attentive and soft, and her curvy, graceful figure relaxed in the cozy space. I haven't done that in years, she admitted, her voice almost a whisper, tinged with nostalgia. Not just the dancing, letting myself just move without thinking. I nodded, listening. The words were simple, yet they felt heavy with unspoken stories, with the weight of moments she hadn't shared with anyone else. She wasn't trying to impress me. She wasn't even aware of how magnetic her presence was. And yet, the room seemed to contract around us, making everything else disappear. I understand, I said quietly, my hand resting lightly on my knee. Sometimes it feels like the world is always moving too fast, and you just pause for a moment and forget how to feel. She looked at me then, really looked, and I felt the vulnerability behind her poised exterior. There was a flicker of a smile at the corners of her lips, but her eyes held a softness, a quiet invitation to trust her with my own truths. Exactly, she said, voice low, almost relieved. I swallowed, unsure if I should share. But something about her presence, the calm steadiness, the way her fingers brushed mine when she shifted slightly, coaxed the words out of me. I worry a lot. About the future, about messing things up, about not living fully. Her hand moved without thinking, lightly grazing mine. A gesture so delicate it felt like it existed solely for connection. Her touch wasn't urgent or commanding, but soft, steady, reassuring. It grounded me in the moment, letting me know she was present and listening. You're not alone, she said softly, her voice carrying warmth and empathy. She shifted a little closer, her knee brushing mine gently. Life has a way of making us feel separate, but sometimes it helps to just share it. We fell into silence for a moment, letting the comfort of presence replace the need for words. The sunlight streamed across the wooden floors, highlighting the subtle freckles on her lightly tanned skin and the soft laugh lines that gave her face warmth. The apartment smelled faintly of cedar and candle wax, a quiet, lived-in aroma that somehow made everything feel safe. Then she spoke again, a whisper, almost to herself. It's been a long time since I felt like this, really seen. I looked at her, the gravity of her words sinking in. I didn't answer with words, there was no need. Instead, I let my hand hover close to hers, close enough for her to feel the possibility of touch, the warmth of connection. In that quiet moment, we had crossed a threshold. Not in actions, but in trust. The emotional intimacy between us had grown, delicate but undeniable, and I realized that some connections didn't need explanation. They just needed attention, presence, and the courage to stay. The afternoon had slowly shifted into early evening, and the sunlight in her apartment softened, spilling through the windows in gentle golden beams. The city outside hummed faintly, distant car horns, a neighbor calling out, the occasional dog bark. But inside, the apartment felt cocooned in quiet warmth. She sat on the edge of the sofa, her long black hair tumbling over one shoulder, lightly tanned skin glowing in the light, dark brown eyes calm yet attentive. Her blouse, a soft cream fabric, fell loosely around her curves, and her posture exuded the effortless grace I'd come to notice. I perched beside her, careful not to close the distance too quickly, though each small movement made my chest tighten with awareness. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full, layered with the echo of the music we had played earlier, the rhythm of our first dance lingering in my memory, and the subtle tension of two people standing on the edge of something they weren't yet ready to name. She noticed the slight chill in the air and reached for a light blanket draped over the back of the sofa. She wrapped it gently around my shoulders, the warmth of the fabric brushing against my skin. Her fingers lingered a fraction longer than necessary as she adjusted the folds, and I felt the quiet electricity of that contact. The brush of her hand was subtle, nonverbal, but it spoke louder than anything we could have said. We sat close enough now that our knees touched lightly, an almost accidental brush that sent a small thrill through me. I could feel her steadying presence beside me, the rise and fall of her chest, the warmth radiating from her side. She didn't speak immediately, letting the silence stretch comfortably, as if giving us both the space to notice the gravity of being this near someone. Finally, she glanced at me, her dark brown eyes searching mine with an expression that was part curiosity, part hesitation, part quiet affection. "You make it easy to forget the rest of the world," she said softly, almost a whisper. Her words carried no expectation, just honesty, and they pressed against something inside me I hadn't known I could feel so openly. I wanted to respond, to say something profound, but instead I let my gaze linger on her face. The subtle freckles across her cheeks, the faint smile lines at the corners of her eyes, the curve of her lips just so. The room smelled faintly of cedar and vanilla, a soft, homey scent that made the moment feel even more intimate. Her hand moved again, this time brushing lightly across the back of mine. The touch was deliberate, steady, and entirely unhurried. I felt a deep warmth spread through me, a quiet acknowledgement that we were sharing something rare, a closeness that didn't need words, that existed in the simple, conscious presence of one another. We stayed like that for a while, not speaking, letting the golden light and soft sounds of the city frame our quiet intimacy. The unspoken understanding between us had grown heavier, richer, and more delicate at the same time. Every glance, every subtle brush of skin, every pause in conversation held weight. In that simple, quiet moment, I realized the truth. The connection between us wasn't defined by declarations or grand gestures. It was in these pauses, these careful touches, these shared silences that we were beginning to understand each other. Completely, tenderly, and without fear. The sunlight was soft now, slanting through the tall windows and filling her apartment with a warm, golden glow. Shadows stretched gently across the polished wooden floors, and the distant city noise. Faint car engines, murmurs of conversation, the occasional bird, felt like it belonged to another world. Inside her apartment, time seemed to slow, stretching each heartbeat into something that mattered. She stood up from the sofa, long black hair falling freely over her shoulders, lightly tanned skin illuminated by the late afternoon light, dark brown eyes calm yet curious. Her curvy, graceful figure moved with effortless elegance, dressed in a flowing peach blouse and black trousers that accentuated the ease in her posture. She looked at me with a soft smile, a subtle mix of playfulness and vulnerability that drew me forward without a word. "Come with me," she said gently, her voice carrying a quiet certainty that made me feel both welcome and slightly nervous. Her hand extended toward me, and when I placed mine in hers, the warmth and light pressure of her fingers made my chest tighten. It was a small touch, delicate, but it spoke volumes, an invitation to trust, to step into a space where the world outside no longer existed. She guided me to her bedroom, and I noticed how naturally her presence filled the space. The room was bright, cozy, and unpretentious. Sunlight spilling across a neatly made bed, a soft rug beneath our feet, a few books and personal items on the nightstand. The warmth of the afternoon light highlighted the subtle freckles on her cheeks, the soft smile lines at the corners of her eyes, and the gentle sway of her hair. Every detail of the room, like her, seemed both lived in and intentional, a reflection of her quiet grace. She gestured toward the center of the room. "Just move," she said, a hint of teasing in her tone. The music was still playing softly, its melody blending with the golden light to create an atmosphere both playful and intimate. She didn't push or demand. She simply created space for me to feel comfortable, to let go of the hesitation that had kept me distant. As I took a tentative step, her hand brushed against mine again, encouraging without urgency. I felt the warmth of her presence settle into me, steady and grounding. Her eyes never left mine, dark brown and attentive, filled with curiosity, trust, and something unspoken. The awareness of how rare these moments were, how fleeting yet profound. We moved together, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the room filling with a rhythm of quiet connection. Every glance, every brush of skin, every subtle shift in posture was meaningful. The closeness was gentle but electric, the kind of intimacy that doesn't need words to be understood. In that moment, I realized the invitation wasn't just about dancing or movement. It was about trust, about letting someone into the quiet corners of their life, about creating a memory that lingered long after the music ended. Her hand lingered near mine, her presence steady, and I knew, not with certainty, but with a quiet, thrilling awareness, that this was a night I would never forget. And in that suspended sunlight, I understood what she had been offering. Not just a dance, but a shared space where connection, vulnerability, and subtle desire could exist fully, without rush, without expectation, and completely in the present. The days that followed felt simultaneously ordinary and altered. The city continued its constant rhythm. Traffic humming, distant conversations drifting through the windows, birds chirping in the early morning. Yet everything seemed slightly sharper, more vivid. Even mundane moments carried traces of her presence, as if the memory of her had left an invisible imprint on the world around me. I hadn't seen her since that afternoon in her sunlit bedroom. We hadn't made promises, we hadn't exchanged lingering goodbyes. And yet, her presence lingered in my mind, in quiet, unspoken ways. In the soft warmth of sunlight on my balcony, in the smell of coffee wafting from a nearby cafe, in the faint strains of a slow jazz song drifting through the air. I saw her there, always. When I closed my eyes, I could feel her hand brushing mine, the light pressure that had made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. I remembered the sway of her body as we moved together, the subtle warmth radiating from her side, the soft curve of her lips as she smiled, and the dark brown eyes that had held a quiet invitation to trust and be seen. Each detail was etched into my mind, more vivid than the world around me, and yet infinitely tender. I walked past the cafe where we had first shared music, and for a moment I thought I might see her sitting there, book in hand, glancing up with that same knowing smile. Of course, she wasn't there, but the memory alone made me smile. Some connections, I realized, don't need constant reminders. They exist quietly, firmly within you. It wasn't just the music or the dance or the sunlight on her long black hair that lingered. It was the feeling of being understood, of being allowed to exist fully without pretense, without fear. She had offered me a space where the ordinary became extraordinary simply because it was shared. I thought of her voice, soft and steady, as she whispered, "I haven't danced in years." And then the invitation, gentle, deliberate, full of trust. She hadn't just pulled me into her apartment that afternoon. She had pulled me into a memory I would carry forever, into a lesson about presence, intimacy, and quiet connection. Some nights leave you changed, though nothing obvious has shifted. Some people leave you altered, though the world remains the same. And some moments, small and tender, linger in your chest like a heartbeat you can't forget. I still hear her voice sometimes, echoing in the quiet moments of my day. I still feel the warmth of her hand brushing mine in sunlight, and I smile, because she was right. I'll never forget that night. Not because it was extraordinary, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was real. It was simple. It was tender. It was alive. And that, I realized, is enough. Headphone, if this story touched your heart. Leave a comment below sharing your favorite moment. Subscribe for more slow burn, age gap romance stories, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that stays with you long after it ends.